So in all my time producing Grimdark content, there is one question that I've been asked more than any others. Do I need to varnish before using Streaking Grime? Well, there's no better way to find out the answer to this than with a little experiment. So if you aren't familiar with Streaking Grime, then here's a little rundown. Streaking Grime, along with a number of other weathering products produced by companies such as AK Interactive and MIG, are enamel-based products. This means that unlike the majority of the paints that we use in this hobby, they're not water soluble and are instead held in a solvent medium. This means that when fully cured, they can be much harder wearing than acrylic paints, and also allows us to do certain fun techniques such as reductive painting. This is where the paint is applied to the miniature and then reactivated and removed from the areas that we do not want it. Something that's just not possible with acrylics. And the way we do this is by using another solvent. White spirit, or mineral spirits if you're in the States, can reactivate the enamel paints, and with the cotton bud or other absorbent material, you can slowly remove the paint from areas that you do not want it to sit, allowing you to have much greater control over where the paint is going to be. This can allow you to build up some nice dirt and grime, but also provide a very nice recessed shading. The reason why I often get asked about varnishing your models prior to taking these steps is because white spirit can be a pretty aggressive solvent. Now there are schools of thought for both using varnish and not using varnish, but I figured that rather than just giving you my opinions, I'll do a little test. So in this video I'm going to try and answer two questions. Number one, do I need to use varnish to protect my miniature when using Streaking Grime? And number two, will using varnish change the effect of the Streaking Grime when used on this miniature? To help me with this, I've had these three tabletop quality Space Marines volunteer for this little project. Up first we have number one, let's call him Luther. Luther is the roughy tufty sort, so he just wants to try and tough it out. Luther has had no varnish or anything applied to protect that acrylic paint job, but the paint has been given multiple days just to make sure that it cures fully. Number two is called Diego, and he's a little bit less headstrong and a bit more cautious. He has had a full coating of matte varnish applied using an airbrush and has been allowed to cure for a good couple of days. Now number three loves the glitz and the glamour, so it can be called Alison. Alison has had a coating of gloss varnish so that she can demonstrate the differences in finish that you get between the different types of surface. So now you've been introduced to our three test subjects, it's time to give them a little grime bath. Using the MIG Streaking Grime applied through my airbrush, all three will have a full coating, built up slowly but in multiple layers. As a little disclaimer, please do be very careful if you choose to use enamels through an airbrush, as they are very toxic. If you do have any concerns over safety, I do have a video on how best to do this, which I'll link in the description or in the top right corner of this video. These will then be left to sit for approximately 20 to 30 minutes before the white spirit and cotton buds will come out. We'll then proceed with our usual technique for reductive painting, putting very gentle pressure on the surfaces but allowing the white spirit and the cotton bud to do all of the hard work. Initially I'll start very gentle, but I will start to be a little bit more robust with my action, just to test what punishment that this paint job can really take. In the case of subject number one, you can see a small amount of paint wearing down and some of that primer showing through on the shoulder pad. But I will say this is only when I have applied a very unnatural amount of pressure to this area. When using a gentle pressure and allowing the white spirit and the cotton bud to do all of the hard work, it's causing no damage at all. Although the cotton bud does have a decent quantity of white spirit in it, this is having no effect on that acrylic paint job. This is because it was allowed to cure fully before starting this process. Should you damage the paint job, then you may have to be careful of the white spirit getting into those damaged areas and under those layers of acrylic paint. But if you're nice and careful, that shouldn't be an issue. So, Luther has suffered a little bit of damage from where I've been a bit rough. But how about our varnish subject, Diego? With a similar amount of pressure applied to the same area, there is no real sign of any wear. The varnish appears to be doing its job. I think it's pretty clear to see that the varnish does offer you a bit more protection on that paint job. So if you are going to be pretty rough, then it's definitely worth giving a coating to protect your lovely paint job. But if you are more careful and you allow your tools to do all the hard work, then it seems that you don't have to worry quite so much. Should you be doing reductive painting without the use of white spirit, much like I did with the oil washes that I used for the skin tones on my Slaanesh demons, then I would very much recommend the varnish, as this process does require a little bit more elbow grease. Now, we also wanted to test the differences in finish when using varnishes. In a comparison between Luther, who was unvarnished, and Diego, who had had a coating of matte varnish, you can see that there is very little difference in terms of finish. The matte varnish model did actually clean up slightly easier than the unvarnished miniature, but not nearly as easily as subject number 3, Alison. The gloss varnish on subject number 3 provided a very smooth surface, which allowed the streaking grime to lift off that paint job very easily. Not only did the grime come off much easier, but it also had much less of an effect on the paint job in terms of the tinting of colours that you usually expect. Comparing subject number 3 against the natural and matte varnish miniatures, you can see that this colour scheme feels a little bit cooler, as you are seeing more of that original pure white coming through as opposed to the tinted off-white of the others. You'll also notice that despite using the enamels, which have got generally a very matte finish, this model is still very much showing to be quite glossy. Now, this can be easily flattened down with a coating of matte varnish, so this could be a great option if you only wanted the effect in the recesses and didn't want to affect your overall colour scheme too much. So with that, let's go back to our 2 questions that needed answering. Question number 1, do I need varnish to protect my miniature when using Streaking Grime? Well, I think that we've shown that if you're careful and you don't get too rough with your miniature, then just allowing the paint to cure properly is probably sufficient, as the white spirit does not react with the acrylic paint, and actually the only damage you're going to cause is generally by your own hand. That being said, the difference in finish between the natural and the matte varnish miniatures is near enough negligible, so adding a coating of matte varnish will not harm your end product at all. If you don't mind adding in another step and the added time of allowing the varnish to cure properly, then really there is no downside to a little added protection.
That's what she said!
Question number 2. Will varnishing the miniature change the effect when using Streaking Grime? To answer this question, mainly we brought in subject number 3, who provided a pretty clear example of how Streaking Grime reacts differently on different surfaces. Whilst the difference between the natural and matte varnish miniatures is almost non-existent, the shiny surface of the gloss varnish miniature shows a considerable difference, with the Streaking Grime being removed much easier and leaving less of an effect. For achieving a good recess shade or a panel lining effect, this can actually work really quite well, as it will have a much decreased effect on your base paint job. So there we go guys, hopefully this little video has answered a couple of the questions you may have when getting into using enamel based products such as the Streaking Grime. If you do have any other questions, then please feel free to throw them in the comments down below, or pop your head in our Discord server where there are a number of guys, including myself, that are more than happy to help answer any questions. I will throw a link down below in the video description for that server. Now, you may have noticed that the channel has been pretty quiet over the last couple of months. That is mostly in part due to my usual full-time job taking up quite a bit of my time, but as you may have noticed if you've seen my social media page, we also picked up this little troublemaker. Now, as I'm sure anyone who has had a Labrador puppy can attest, it's almost a full-time job in itself keeping him out of trouble and stopping him from hurting himself. But now he is getting a bit older and not quite so troublesome, so I am back to filming and producing content, so expect plenty more to come in the near future. And remember guys, if all else fails, spray it black and start again.